In the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, a ship was making its way toward a lonely island. On board was David, a weather officer assigned by the government to spend a whole year there collecting weather data. His mission was simple: record everything about the island's changing climate, survive for 12 months, and then return home. In exchange, he would be paid handsomely. David had been given enough food and supplies to last a year. After days at sea, the crew finally reached the island. Taking a small boat, they landed on the shore. The place was completely deserted, not even a bird in sight. The only signs of habitation were a lighthouse and a small cabin where David was supposed to live. Another weather officer, Robert, had stayed there before him, but his duty had ended. He was supposed to be picked up and replaced by David. But when the crew went inside the cabin, they were shocked. The place was a mess. Robert's belongings scattered everywhere. Yet Robert himself was nowhere to be found. Thinking he might be at the lighthouse, David and the captain hurried there. What they saw was strange. The lighthouse was barricaded with sharp wooden stakes, as if someone had tried to keep something out. They banged on the door, but no answer came. Finally, they forced their way in, only to find a man named Gruner inside. When asked about Robert, Gruner replied coldly, "He's dead. He went toward the sea one day and never came back." The words sent a chill down David's spine. The captain turned to David and said, "If you want, you can still come back with us. This place doesn't feel safe." But David refused. He was determined to finish his mission, no matter what. Hoping for a big reward, he chose to stay. The captain, uneasy, handed David a gun for protection. Then the ship sailed away, leaving David behind with only Gruner for company. That night, while settling in, David found Robert's old diary in a drawer. It was filled with unsettling notes, mentions of strange, mysterious creatures on the island. There were crude sketches of bizarre, inhuman figures. Some entries were unfinished, almost as if Robert hadn't had the chance to explain fully. David assumed maybe Robert had been lonely and just doodled to pass time, but deep inside, something felt off. The next morning, David began his weather recordings. Near the shore, he noticed piles of rocks arranged in odd patterns with seashells placed between them. It looked unnatural, like some kind of ritual. He suspected Gruner had done it. Later, using his binoculars, David spotted Gruner near the lighthouse, and for a split second, he saw another figure standing beside him. But when he looked again, it was gone. That night, while David was working, someone knocked on his door. He called out, "Gruner," but no reply came. Taking a lamp, he stepped closer. That's when he heard eerie sounds, voices, but not human. Suddenly, a grotesque hand slid under the door, clawing to get in. David's heart froze. He ran to the basement and hid. Moments later, the creature forced its way inside, searching for him. Through a crack, David watched its twisted body prowl the room, but his movement gave him away. The creature lunged, reaching for him through the gap. Desperate, David grabbed a knife and stabbed its eye. The monster shrieked in pain and fled back into the night. Shaken, David realized Robert's diary wasn't madness. It was the truth. These creatures were real. The next morning, David found non-human footprints in the sand, leading back into the sea. Terrified, he understood now why Gruner had spiked the lighthouse with wooden barricades. He ran there begging to be let in, but Gruner shouted back, "You should have left with the ship," and poured water down on him to drive him away. David had no choice but to defend himself. He boarded up his cabin with planks, built a spike fence, and set oil-soaked books and papers outside the door, ready to burn them as a weapon. While searching the house, he found an old chest containing a rifle and plenty of bullets. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. As night fell, his heart pounded. He clutched the rifle and waited in silence. Then came the sound, the waves breaking, the screeches, the shadows moving. When he peeked outside, his blood ran cold. Not one, but dozens of those creatures were emerging from the water, crawling toward his home. They attacked, slamming the door. David fired shot after shot, dropping several of them, but instead of retreating, the others grew enraged. He lit the pile of papers and books, setting the entrance ablaze. The fire roared, the creatures hissed, and one by one they retreated back into the sea. But the fire spread fast, consuming the wooden cabin. David barely escaped, wrapping himself in a blanket and diving outside. He hid behind the rocks near the lighthouse as flames devoured his only shelter. His arm was badly wounded from the fire. Then, as if mocking him, rain poured down, extinguishing the fire. But it was too late. The cabin was gone. Now survival meant only one thing. He had to get inside the lighthouse. The next morning, David hid among the rocks, watching and waiting. When Gruner stepped out to fetch water, David followed. But just then, one of the creatures, larger and fiercer than the rest, lunged at him. David wrestled it down, aiming his rifle at its head, ready to pull the trigger. Gruner shouted, "Stop! Don't shoot! That's my pet!" David froze. The realization hit him. Gruner had tamed one of the very monsters. Using the moment, David made his demand. "If you want this thing alive, you'll let me stay in the lighthouse. Otherwise, I'll kill it." Gruner, knowing David had food, gunpowder, and ammunition, reluctantly agreed. And just like that, David's real fight for survival had only begun. The creature was licking David's hand. When David woke up, he realized that because of the creature's licking, his hand was completely healed. Seeing this left him shocked. David now wanted to know more about this creature from Kroner, and then reveal everything to the world, because to him it felt like pure magic. David thought, if we bring this secret out, Kroner and I will both make a fortune and become famous. But Kroner didn't care about any of that. He had no interest in leaving the island. He had no family left in the world, and for him, this island was perfect. He ruled here as if he were a king, master of his own world. That's why he had carved all over the island. Kroner is the king here. But David couldn't understand. Why did this strange creature obey Kroner like a servant? Kroner explained that once he had saved her life. She had gotten trapped in his fishing net when she was much smaller. And from that day on, she had stayed with him, listening to everything he said. But Kroner was a harsh man. He treated the creature cruelly, using her however he wanted. He admitted that once she had even attacked him, and in return, he punished her so brutally that afterward, she began to see herself as his slave. Kroner also revealed that the reason these creatures came out of the ocean every night was to rescue her, but he never allowed that to happen. During the day, they couldn't attack. The sunlight burned their skin. David no longer wanted to stay there. He wanted to escape the island at any cost, but as evening fell, Kroner told him, grab a gun and get ready. They could attack any moment. They turned on the lighthouse beacon, and within minutes, a swarm of creatures emerged from the sea, moving toward them. Kroner fired shot after shot, while David panicked and hid inside the lighthouse, cowering in a corner until he finally passed out. Kroner fought them alone all night long. By morning, furious, he splashed water on David's face and shouted, if you want to stay alive, you'll have to kill them yourself. Otherwise, I'll throw you out of the lighthouse. From now on, you'll do everything I say. Fetch water, handle the chores, and stand guard with me at night. David had no other choice. He became Kroner's unwilling helper. But one thing he hated the most was watching Kroner torment the female creature night after night. That evening, both men prepared for guard duty again. The creatures rose from the ocean once more, but this time, David wasn't afraid. He fired back at them. Kroner, however, didn't lift a finger. He locked the gate, leaving David outside, forcing him to learn how to fight on his own. David battled the creatures all night, bleeding and exhausted. By dawn, when Kroner opened the gate, he found David sitting outside, covered in blood but still alive. He had finally learned how to fight. Days turned into weeks. Nights were spent fighting the sea creatures, and days were filled with endless lighthouse chores. For David, the island had become a prison. All he could think about was escaping and breathing free air again. But slowly, something changed. David developed a strange bond with a female creature. He began to feel sorry for her, realizing how painful it was to be cut off from your own kind. Perhaps she felt the same way. He even gave her a name, Anarius. Time passed, and then one day, they noticed something unusual. The creature's attacks were starting to fade, becoming fewer and fewer. David wondered if maybe the creatures had gone away for the winter, or if they had simply realized fighting these two wasn't worth it. But Kroner quickly dismissed the thought. He was certain they would return, stronger in numbers. A few uneasy days passed in silence. One night, after dinner, Kroner and David decided to kill time with a game of chess. But in the heat of competition, they made a deadly mistake. They forgot to turn on the lighthouse beacon. The creatures seized the darkness and attacked. David saw just how many there were this time. Even fighting side by side, he and Kroner couldn't last long. Their bullets were nearly gone, and there was no plan. Scrambling for survival, they retreated to the top of the lighthouse. Kroner was badly wounded in the leg during the chaos. It felt like the end. But just as the creatures closed in, dawn broke. With the first light of the sun, the monsters retreated into the sea. By daylight, Aneris tried to tend to Kroner's wounds, while David realized the grim truth. This was a fight they couldn't win. Supplies were running out, ammunition was almost gone, and time was against them. The next day, David spotted a ship far out on the water. Rushing inside, he grabbed the flare gun, ready to signal for rescue. But Kroner stopped him. He had no intention of letting David leave. That moment, Aneris attacked Kroner, desperate to protect David. Kroner wasn't just trying to keep David on the island. He wanted control. The island was his kingdom, and he would never allow David to escape and reveal Aneris to the outside world. The ship slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. David's chance was gone. Days dragged on. Kroner grew more violent, especially toward Aneris, something David could no longer stand. One day, David gifted Aneris a small toy boat he had carved from fish bones. She led him to a hidden corner of the island, where a real boat sat abandoned. When David confronted Kroner about it, Kroner admitted he had known all along. Years ago, survivors had arrived by boat, but none lived to see morning. The creatures killed them all. They had been carrying weapons, but their ship sank in a storm near the island. That gave David an idea. If they could retrieve the sunken explosives, maybe they had a chance. He proposed using an old diving suit to recover the cargo. Kroner refused, but David was willing to risk his life. Eventually, Kroner agreed, but secretly plotted to abandon David underwater, letting the creatures finish him off. They rowed to the wreck site. David dove in, the heavy suit weighing him down. The ship was shattered on the seabed, but luck was on his side. He found crates of dynamite. Then, shadows appeared, Terrified, David stumbled, unable to move in the suit. Kroner assumed he was dead, but the shadows weren't hunters. They were just two young creatures. Somehow David managed to escape the suit and reach the surface with the explosives. Back on land, he and Daenerys rigged 2 layers of dynamite around the lighthouse. The plan: lure the creatures in and wipe them out in a single strike. Months passed, winter came, and suddenly the attack stopped. It was as if the creatures knew a trap awaited. Kroner grew paranoid, accusing Daenerys of warning them, and his cruelty worsened until David stepped in. Together they devised a desperate final plan: leave the main gate wide open. Daenerys would scream from the top, drawing the creatures in. The trap worked. Swarming with rage, the monsters stormed the lighthouse. David fought them off, buying time. Kroner hit the detonator, but nothing happened. David had accidentally disconnected the wires earlier. He scrambled to fix it while Kroner held the creatures at bay. Finally, the first layer exploded, wiping out many of them. Kroner set off the second blast, and the world shook. When morning came, both men awoke amid the ruins. David and Gruner were killing the surviving creatures left after the blast. Suddenly, David noticed that one of the wounded creatures was wearing a necklace made of wooden pieces. Seeing this, he realized that these creatures were actually an intelligent species. But Gruner didn't care at all and killed the creature anyway. From that day onward, David and Gruner kept watch at the lighthouse every night, but no more attacks ever came. Deep inside, David was filled with guilt because he knew they had done something terribly wrong to the creatures. One day, while walking along the seashore, David saw 2 creature children watching him from the water. Hoping to ask for forgiveness and build peace with them, he arranged stones in a circle and placed a small boat made of bone inside it. Every night he looked at the circle from the lighthouse, waiting and hoping that someone would take the boat as a sign of acceptance. But many days passed and no one touched it. One evening, David went down to the shore carrying a torch. He noticed a small creature watching him quietly. He placed the torch on the ground, raised his hands, and stepped back, showing he meant no harm. Gaining trust, the little creature came closer to him. Then from behind, another creature appeared, followed by many more. That creature was none other than Daenerys, and the small one was her son. The child approached David, but just then, Gruner fired his gun. The sound terrified all the creatures. Gruner aimed the gun directly at Daenerys, demanding she leave. But Daenerys stood her ground fearlessly, her chest held high. David calmed her down, and eventually Gruner stepped back. As the creatures began to retreat, Gruner suddenly fired a flare gun. The burning shot struck Daenerys' son, and before her very eyes, the child writhed in pain and died. David tried to stop Daenerys, but now her trust in him was gone. Enraged, David stormed back to the lighthouse and attacked Gruner. But Gruner was stronger and struck David down, injuring him badly. He was about to kill David when David called him by his real name and said, "You're not a killer, Robert." Gruner, exhausted and broken, finally felt remorse. He opened the lighthouse door and walked out into the midst of the creatures. They tore him apart while David sat inside, listening to his screams. A year later, a new weather officer arrived and asked about David. After a long pause, David remembered Gruner's words. He no longer wanted to leave this place. So he simply replied, "David went out to sea and never returned."